Everyone? Great, good crowd. So I'm attempting to do something a little different. So this PowerPoint, I'm attempting to actually make it that you can take this PowerPoint as your template as a starting point for any presentation you may do. So 5 of these slides are actually empty template slides. You'll be able to download this PowerPoint and we'll see if it's useful to you. I hope it will be. So we'll see if we pull it off. If not, you can send me angry emails and I'll probably cry. So a little bit about my background. I started out as an engineer at EA Sports. Oh, please. You can't hear? Volume, 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 test, test, test. All right. Thank you. So a little bit about myself. I started out as a developer, electronic arts, and I still try to be as much a developer as possible. Being technical only helps you out. I've also spent some time at roles at Google and at Cisco as a product manager. So really on the other side of the equation, not only speaking to decision makers, but also on the receiving end, engineers proposing to me various opportunities to improve our practices, opportunities to implement DevOps, if you will. And lately I've spent some time speaking to external business owners in various enterprises as a course director for TechTown and various independent opportunities as well. And it's been a lot of fun. And hopefully some of this experience I can translate and offer to you. But to begin, who here is familiar with Alice in Wonderland? All right. So if you picture the scene, I really love the scene. Alice walks up to the Cheshire Cat. She's in the middle of the woods and she's walking and she doesn't know where to go. And she says, "Sir, will you tell me where to go from here?" And he says, "Well, it very much depends on where you're trying to get to." And she says she doesn't know where. And he says, "Well, it doesn't matter what road you take." And that's just something that it really resonates to me. You have to know what your goal is, otherwise any route will take you there. And that's what this talk is about. It's about achieving a goal in a business situation. And final question, who here works in an enterprise, over 50 employees, over 50 people? Oh, wow. So it's even more relevant than I expected. So essentially you want money, or money in the form of resources from this guy, from a pointy-haired boss. And who is this pointy-haired boss? This pointy-haired boss, we're going to talk about the worst-case scenario. We're going to talk about he's completely untechnical, he or she. They typically have a sales background. And if you're speaking to the C-suite, 19 times out of 20, data has shown that typically from a finance or a consulting background. And you can verify this if you look in Crunchbase, a lot of these kind of C-suite executives, public companies, you kind of see that. You see consulting and they kind of move up from there. And how do you convince this pointy-haired boss to do something? You just heard this great technical practice at DevOpsDays. You want to implement continuous integration. You want to implement continuous delivery. You want to implement some new great technique. You want to cut down your technical debt. You want to establish waterfall. You want to establish agile, whatever. Ultimately, you're usually talking about an investment in infrastructure. And how do you make this more effective? Well, the business equation is pretty straightforward. Ultimately, it's revenue minus cost equals profit. Okay, so if you're a C++ program, you may recognize my syntax here. If you increment your revenue, or you can decrement your cost, either or, you can increase your profit. So it's that simple. Don't get too crazy here. We're going to make a simple argument. We're going to either increase our revenue or decrease our cost, increase profit, and then let me do what I want, essentially. So decision makers, if you look from their perspective, they don't like open-ended investments with vague promises of return, and that's exactly what engineers like. Engineers want to say, "Oh, you know what? Here's this new technology. I want to go and experiment with it. Just let me vaguely tell you when it's done. I'll just tell you when this feature's done. Leave me alone, and I'll come back with you then." Decision makers typically want the other extreme. They typically want you to say, "Okay, my customers have asked me for 35 features. I want you to go away and then come back in 6 months with the exact date where all those features are perfectly implemented with 0 bugs. I want to sell all those features now, and then I want to golf until then. So take away all my risk and just give it to me. That's kind of the expectation, and you have to find some middle ground. And how we find middle ground is with metrics. We make a well-constructed argument with metrics and facts to support this. And it may be tempting to promise all right, fine, I'll just give you those features, no risk, and then you'll worry about it later. You probably shouldn't do that. It's very risky. But that's what we're going to do. We're going to make an argument and meet that decision maker in the middle. So here's the first slide from our template that I promised. The first slide, just from a very high-level point of view, introduce your idea. So some examples of this. Our utilization is terrible. Average utilization, it's kind of an unspoken secret in the cloud. The average VM CPU is about 5%. Maybe you want to make that better. That's a very straightforward, decrement your cost argument. Or maybe your improvement is, continuous release, continuous delivery, which will help us have higher feature velocity, help us get more features out to customers, which will increment your revenue. And a key subtlety here, if you're noticing, you typically have to make an assumption to bridge whatever improvement you want to one of these cost drivers, either revenue or cost. And that's where the magic is. That's where we get uncomfortable. That's where it's really hard. That's where you have to really bridge assumptions. But that's where you can really make this argument go from good to great. You could just say, hey, I'm going to cut down tickets, and that may be okay. But if you say, I'm going to cut down tickets, and by cutting down tickets, I'm really going to cut down costs, or I'm really going to help us release that many more features, that's how you can make your argument really powerful and really catch their attention. Because you're essentially doing their job for them. You're giving them an avenue to improve the business. And typically decision makers are kind of stressed and they're trying to hit quarterly goals or numbers, and you're really speaking their language. So that's the first slide of the template. The second slide of the template is we're going to go into a little more detail. What is the specific problem being solved, and what is the solution to this problem? So for example, let's say we're cut down on utilization, make our cloud utilization, cut down our bill, and we'll do so, for example, by containerization or some other solution. Or perhaps if you have a quarterly software release, which is very common, and you want to improve that, you want to make that bi-weekly. Very typical use case for a continuous delivery. You can make that argument, we'll ship X more features and have way more revenue. We'll have faster turnaround for bug fixes, and really catch the customer. And the more customized you can make this your use case, the better. And then finally, here's a third template. So in this template, we do get a little more detailed. We really talk about what is the basic analysis to give the first 2 slides credibility. But on the flip side, you don't want to get too detailed that you get caught in the weeds. Because essentially, if you think of your slides are somewhat like they're in a surface area, if you will. So think of your slide, just think of your program. The more complex your slides are, the more surface area you expose for attacks or objections. You want to keep your slides simple, to the point, and your decision maker is essentially a compiler. They look at slides all day, every day in meetings. They get presented all day, every day, and they're going to have a very high filter. They're going to spot mundane details and assault them. So you want to have very few, very focused, but very polished effort. And here's where you give your business case a little bit of that credibility. And essentially how you do that is, let's say I have an example here about continuous integration. Some typical steps you do so, you say, all right, we need continuous integration. Right now we're checking in code, tests aren't being run, it's very unstable. First step typically is get our unit testing up. So get some automation testing, automation coverage in our code base. Then let's say stand up a local Jenkins instance, get our plugins, integrate Slack. Let's say we're going to do chat ops. So now whenever integration happens, our Slack room's going to be notified. So pretty standard business case, if you will. So just outline the steps you're going to do, and then again, tie it to that revenue. When we do all of this, we'll get our continuous, instead of our customers waiting 3 months for hot fixes, they'll get it every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, etc. And now, I'm going to make some bold estimate that's going to help our revenue by 5%, 10%. And that is risky, that is scary. It's scary to make these assumptions, and they don't always have to be perfect, but at least you're putting something out there. You're putting in something out there to debate, to discuss, and to build upon. And this is also a great opportunity if you have a prototype. Remember, the code talks. So slides are great, but prototypes and code is even better. If you can now say, by the way, with one of our teams, we set up a local Jenkins server. We got integration working just in a prototype way for 1-2 sprints. And hey, it showed that we were able to release, so this is realistic. And now if you jump from your slides, you give that quick prototype some real data of this working in your environment, in your enterprise, that's really powerful. Now you're really hitting it home. You've tied it to their business drivers, you're speaking their language, and now you're showing them real data and code, how to integrate it. It can be really powerful. So if you're unfamiliar, well, let me take a step back. Another way to make this argument more powerful is to use analyst metrics. And this is very common in the business world. And in DevOps, in this space, one of the best source of analyst metrics is free. It's the annual Puppet Labs Data DevOps report. And just out of curiosity, has anybody read these reports or is familiar with them? Okay, a fair amount. If you've not read them, please take a moment to look at them. They're really great resources. They survey, I believe it's 3,500 developers and developer teams, and just get some benchmarks in the industry. How are these techniques performing? And this year, they're actually doing this. This was very useful for this talk. They went ahead and, on their own, try to tie a lot of these metrics to business outcomes as well. And you can go into this report and observe this and get great examples on how to do this. So here in this example I have, they found that high-performing teams, and they define high-performing teams essentially by teams that have adopted DevOps practices, such as continuous integration, continuous delivery, practicing failure. They found that these teams spend 22% less time on rework, which is fairly believable. You're doing, you have unit testing, you have all this automation, so you're spending less time on surprise work. And it's probably even more than this. If you think about how you work as a developer, you need at least 4-hour blocks to get anything done. At least I do. Sure, if you're a rock star developer, you can get a lot of work done in a half hour you have between all the meetings all day. But for me, I need big chunks of time. And they even demonstrate here that high-performing teams have less meetings, they have less interruptions. So, and they do a very straightforward analysis here. They take the average salary, and they multiply it by this time they estimate you'll save, and they multiply it across the number of engineers in an organization. And that's very simple, but that's sometimes all you need is just some basic statistics. So this is based on data, and it's presented, and you can make a powerful argument with it. That, hey, here's something by 3,500 developers, here's an external analyst group, they're letting credence to this, hey, we should adopt this. If it's getting returned for them, it's returned for us. And these are big numbers. And sell them. Sell your decision maker, but hey, you could be responsible for saving the company, millions and millions of dollars. Isn't this going to be good for you? And if you read a book on, slight tangent, a book on power, how you get powerful in the workplace, you essentially make your boss powerful. And this is how, now the little lights are going to flick on in their mind, the pointy-eared bosses, you're going to make them powerful. And if you make them powerful, they're going to be happy and let you, ultimately implement this best practice. Another here's another example of how you could make a cost decrement argument. And in this case, they're using downtime. So they've made a flat assumption that downtime costs enterprises $500,000 an hour for every hour your application is down. And they've shown data that shows high-performing teams can get up in an hour or less because they're usually highly automated, all the way to the extreme low-performing teams that are down for several days at a time. And honestly, $500,000 is a conservative estimate. It's usually more in enterprise circumstances, especially since a large variety of enterprises, they have lots of applications, and these applications typically have few very highly monetized users that are paying $100,000 to several $100,000 a license a month on the application. They're other large enterprises, so they have very heavy SLAs, very heavy contract requirements. Downtime is just not an option. It hurts your brand, it hurts your revenue. So you can easily make an argument, many cases, this is $500,000 or more per hour. So if you can cut that down, if you practice failure, there's a great argument you can make for cost. Hey, we can improve DevOps, we can help our enterprise that way as well. Finally, there is we're going to talk about the flip side, how do we increment revenue? And here at Puppet Labs, it gives us a kind of a bunch of bullets as well. We could get our features out to market faster, we can release with fewer bugs, we can experiment more. Perhaps even driving customer engagement, sales leads, business intelligence, referrals. So lots of great examples here. You can read in further on how to tie this funny concept over here, revenue, to what you actually do, which is write features, implement stuff, monitoring in your websites, implement business intelligence. And some other cost drivers to note here. So security. Security tends to be one of those fuzzy topics, like how do I advocate increased security? It's just a cost center, right? Well, increasingly, security is our brand. So if you invest in security, you can advertise that. And there's very powerful arguments you can make now that security is a revenue driver. If we implement security, if we have DevOps automation, which works great with security, so now you're automatically patching your operating systems, you're automatically updating, everything is up to date, you're adhering to basic security practices, you can advertise that, sell your brand, sell that product, get it out there. And even, as well as product performance, so understanding, having great monitoring is another great revenue driver, because now you can really understand the bottlenecks of your application. What's your application's profile? Is your application RAM bound? Is your application CPU bound? Does it cliff for performance? Does your application work great for 1,000 users? When you get to 1,001, you have terrible performance. You can't do that unless you install great monitoring. And great monitoring helps you tell that story of, hey, we can have a reliable platform, we can really drive revenue. So again, a lot of these topics that we talk here, they can really be expanded. All these best practices from DevOps Days, you can make a great argument to adopt them in your enterprise. And ultimately, that'll really increase your satisfaction. And to change gears a little bit, I actually really enjoyed Michael's talk. I'm really proud of him for being brave enough to stand up here and not be hip, and say waterfall is cool. Maybe microservices aren't so cool. I actually think Dwight Eisenhower would agree with one aspect. Sure, plans themselves aren't always accurate, but the act of planning is very valuable because you do discover additional requirements. You do discover additional things which you may have missed. Granted, you may not want to spend 3 months planning, but an hour planning, an hour just really thinking about that NAT chart. At least in the military perspective, that's what he did. He didn't trust that those plans would be useful when contact with the enemy occurred, but they did put in place those plans just to understand and to get a sense of what would happen. I almost expected Michael to say that Golang, every startup shouldn't be written in Golang, which is super trendy, super hip, but he didn't, and that's good, because we can't throw away every hip thing. So, so I am a little bit hypocrite. I said don't do waterfall, but I do have as my fourth slide here is the potential roadmap. You should have a disclaimer that these are ideal deliverables. Again, this is an ideal plan, but it's useful to have an estimate and include it in your pitch, because if you don't, essentially you'll be asked for it. You'll be asked for, can I get a sense of about when I'll get these benefits you're asking, about when can I expect them, about what are your tasks, and they'll be really happy that you have this. But again, you have to heavily preface it. 1 day into development, your roadmap is no longer accurate. You can't just take this and run with it, and that's what your decision maker will want to do. They want to say, great, hold you to it, and not talk to you again for 3 months. So you have to heavily preface it, I'm offering you an ideal roadmap, but this is irrelevant tomorrow. And finally, to go along with your roadmap, you want to give them a sense of what kind of resources you'll require along with this roadmap. And that helps as well. If you're not asking for money, you're probably asking for time, which is your approximate. And that's my 5 slide. So you can take those 5 slides from this presentation, start your roadmap with it. I wouldn't recommend using it in a VC approach because there's some marketing aspects as well. But for an engineering-focused audience, I think this template can serve you well. And finally, as I was alluding to before, anticipate objections. So your decision maker, perhaps will be a little cynical here, but I want to equip you. They may answer their phone during your presentation. They may take a conversation during your presentation. They may stand up in the middle of your presentation and talk openly about what they're going to eat for lunch. Walk in a circle. Don't get alarmed. Don't get flustered. Be calm, and maybe take out your own phone. Maybe play Minecraft, whatever. Just keep your cool. This can happen. And if you're cynical, you can think of it as a power play. More likely, it's just absent-minded. Hey, another thing that may happen. Has anyone heard of the term bike shedding? Good, a few of you. So this happens often as well. So your audience is typically non-technical, and you're typically offering a highly technical improvement. Bike shedding is the tendency for us as human beings, and we all do this, to focus on maybe the less important details that we understand. The example here is a committee planning a nuclear power plant. Instead of, they passed the $10 million or the $10 billion to plan the plant in 10 minutes, but then they spent 30 minutes arguing about the details around the shed to hold the bikes. What kind of roof should it have? What kind of fence should it have? And this happens quite a lot. You may find your audience is focusing on seemingly mundane, irrelevant details to you. And you'd be, but that's what they understand. They may want to contribute. They subconsciously want to add value. And they may decide that arguing with you 45 minutes about some minor detail is the way they'll do that. Don't get flustered. That's okay. And in some cases, some teams have actually included details that are in place for decision makers they're allowed to modify. An example is from the gaming industry. The producers, I read, always wanted to take out something. So the artist would intentionally include like a duck flapping around in the animation. And then the producer would sit down, see all the animations, and say, okay, it looked great, but take out the duck. And the art guy would say, okay, well, I guess so. But just anticipating those objections, because there will be. They're likely not just going to sit there and say, oh, great job, improve everything, go on. They're probably going to want to change something, and that's okay. Just anticipate it. And on the flip side, it is possible they could actually have insightful, thoughtful objections. I know it seems unlikely, but your audience could actually add value. They could actually have insight, and just be prepared for that as well. Like that somebody could have good ideas and have an open mind, to think on your feet and think about what are your sacred cows, what you can give on, because typically these are levers, these are trade-offs. And finally, beware, it's a very funny thing. It's drifting between the soft factors and the hard factors. You may be outnumbered in your presentation. You walk into a presentation, there's 10 decision makers in you. Try to put one or two, if you're concerned about this, friendly advocates in the room with you. Maybe a friendly engineering manager or one or two highly respected senior engineers that are aligned with you to voice up as well, so it's not you're not so outnumbered, because you're probably flustered, you're thinking on your feet, it's kind of a stressful situation. It's nice to have one or two allies, if nothing else, to help you feel better. And finally, if you're looking to expand on the template, additional slides you can add if you wish. I actually took these out, trying to pare these down, but you can have a risk slide where you rank by severity is very common. Probability of an occurrence, so that could be an opportunity. You can have other alternatives to your project. I know your idea is awesome and magical, but there are maybe one or two almost as good alternatives to put in there, just to give some variety, some time that you thought into this. You can have more details in your head count, your resources, or even some kind of broader strategic alignment. Let's say your company is really into a particular buzzword that they're all really caught on, and you just kind of throw that in there to say, hey, I'm part of this, I'm on board, and that can help as well. And finally, I want to summarize: less is more. Really be focused in your slides, and again, hypocritical here, because I'm giving you a bunch of slides and I'm telling you to have less slides. I'm full of hypocrisy, which is another thing don't be alarmed about. But yes, less is more. Your decision makers are compilers. They're going to compile your slide for errors, and they're going to zero in if you have seemingly wording errors and drill you about them. So just anticipate it. Have less, less is more. And finally, slides are good. Working code is great. Have those demos, have those prototypes. You may have to invest up front some of your time to prove out some of these concepts. And if you can do so, prove out continuous delivery, prove out containerization, whatever it is, these techniques. If you're advocating microservices, maybe prove that out and prove out those benefits there before you advocate that. It really helps your argument rather than just having slideware. And that's in conclusion. I'd like to open up to questions, end a little early, and see how I can help you out. Thank you.
Do we have anyone who has any questions for Peter this morning? All right.
Hey, thanks for taking my question. I recently went through this a couple of months ago, putting together something similar to this. And the challenge I had was putting numbers on the costs associated with the project. To some extent, I felt like I was pulling figures out of thin air.
Mm-hmm.
I think I figured out, I think the one metric I did come up with was, how many engineers is this going to take? Or how much engineering time is this going to save? And then I just kind of took an average salary and multiplied. Is there a better way, or are there other things that should factor in when coming up with these rough estimates?
Honestly, that's best practice. And you'll find even when corporations estimate at a high level, and I'll go ahead, I'll make myself vulnerable, I'll put out numbers. So I've seen enterprises estimate for US-based resources, when they add in engineer salaries and benefits, they'll average at about $250 a year. $250,000 a year for an all-in cost per resource, just a nice round number. And then they tend to lower that to about $180 a year for overseas. And then they just take fractions of that. So you'll find even when CFOs of IBM and other large companies are doing this, that's the numbers they're using, that's their estimates they're using. And you're right, like you feel nervous, but then when you look at these Excels they're using, that's exactly what they're doing, not more sophisticated. And that's the thing you'll find, you'll just imagine as an engineer that other people somewhere are doing way more sophisticated things than that. And that's very intimidating, but then you find, oh my gosh, they're not. In fact, they're sometimes even less sophisticated than you are. They're just doing that plus 10% and being done, you know. And so yeah, I've not seen, and I'm sure there's someone somewhere who will make me a total liar, but I've seen over 5 instances where that's all done. So thanks for sharing.
Cool. So thank you, Peter. Appreciate that.
Thank you. I'm getting my laptop.
The lesson I took away is none of us know what we're doing.